Hello and happy Monday evening.
Happy Monday evening, one and all.
It's all going off in Syria.
It is. It's sort of 11 days that shook the world, isn't it? It's one of those moments.
I mean, it's so consequential, so unexpected. That's the one thing everyone seems to be able to agree
absolutely.
on. The Hemingway line about gradually, then suddenly
which
has
I think
come true.
Anne Applebaum did in a very good piece in The Atlantic. But as everyone I think by now knows, the Assad dynasty has been overthrown in Syria after half a century, and there are new forces in Damascus. And maybe just to get a flavour of the sort of portentousness for a moment, let's get there's a quick blast of President Biden, of course, approaching the end of his presidency yesterday, Sunday, making a statement.
We will remain vigilant. Make no mistake, some of the rebel groups that took down Assad have their own grim record of terrorism and human rights abuses. We've taken note of statements by the leaders of these rebel groups in recent days, and they're saying the right things now. But as they take on greater responsibility, we will assess not just their words, but their actions.
Yeah. That kind of cautious optimism that Biden expressed, just been expressed this afternoon in a common statement by David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is kind of the mood. Yeah. So shall we kind of go into what's happened and why and the history? And...
Well, let's start with Assad, I guess. Let's start with the past.
Okay, so on Sunday, Bashar al-Assad and his family fled to Russia after 24 years in power. We'll get to this guy in a minute, but the face of the liberation is a guy called Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, who's the leader of the group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. Common ground, I think everyone can agree, it's a huge moment of celebration, a sort of amazing release of human energy and emancipation. Assad was a really ruthless dictator.
Where did it all go wrong with Assad? Because when his dad died, who was the autocratic dictator?
Shall we start at the very beginning?
Let's go back.
All right.
Yeah.
Syria is...
Because I'll tell you why, Matt, because I think I didn't realise how ignorant I was about Syria until I started deep reading into it this morning. And I suspect that I might be doing them a disservice, but I suspect a lot of our readers are kind of listeners are thinking, where did this all come from?
Well, where it comes from is that Syria is one of the great artificial constructs of 20th century cartography. And it was dreamt up by two diplomats, François-Georges Picot and Mark Sykes. British-French agreement. The Sykes-Picot agreement was secret in 1916.
Yeah.
Sorry. And after the war, that became part of the sort of dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire. So that's where this entity came from, not
amazing,
from, it's extraordinary.
And you can tell that because the lines on the map are so straight.
Yeah, exactly.
They've been written by somebody who's never been there.
100%.
Yeah.
So, and it's very important because it's sort of the Clapham Junction of the Middle East. It's located at the intersection of Asia, Europe, and Africa. To the west is the Mediterranean. It borders with Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon. And it's also notable for being almost unbelievably multi-denominational and sectarian.
Yes.
And to go back to what you were asking about Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez, it's sort of been frozen by terror, that division and that divisiveness, since 1970, when Hafez al-Assad, the father, rose to power, seized power in 1970, and actually became the country's president the following year. And that family has ruled ever since. And the twist in the story is that the eldest son, Bassel, was being lined up as the successor to Hafez, but he died in a car crash in 1994. And so Bashar, who was leading a sort of relatively quiet and westernized life in London as an ophthalmologist, had to go back and step into his brother's shoes.
Do you know the circumstances of the car crash? It's extraordinary.
He was
driving to the airport to go on a skiing trip.
Yeah, 150 miles an hour.
And he told the chauffeur to sit in the back, took the wheel, and headed off, hit a barrier at 150, wasn't wearing a seatbelt. So clunk, click every trip, kids.
Exactly. So Bashar unexpectedly finds himself in pole position. And it's a very interesting thing because it's absolutely true that Bashar al-Assad was a very unimpressive person.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have read into this. John Simpson posted a very egregious post overnight.
Very strange tweet.
Suggesting that he was the creature of forces and
said he was not wicked but weak.
Yeah. Now, I had a very interesting conversation a few years ago with someone very close to Bashar al-Assad, who said, your problem in the West is that you think all dictators look like monsters. And he said, you don't understand the complexity of what he called it, the autocratic mind.
Yeah.
He said, now the great book on this is Robert J. Lifton's The Nazi Doctors, which is how did these civilized people become murderous bastards in the concentration camps?
Yeah.
And Bashar al-Assad was exactly the same. He has a British wife. Before he went back to Syria, he was apparently a very sort of liberal, easygoing, quite geeky character. But once he got back to Syria, the other half of his personality, the dynastic half, kicked in.
Well, let me just pull you up on that slightly, because there's this weird interlude, which also, again, in my research is known as the Damascus Spring, which lasts about 18 months.
Yeah.
And he makes and I think the reason I want to point this out is that I think it's possibly pertinent to what's just about to happen now, is there's a kind of an uplifted feeling.
Do you mean the 2011?
No, that's the Arab Spring. That's when it all goes all
pear-shaped.
Everything goes pear-shaped. But for about 18 months, when Bashar comes into power, it's called the Damascus Spring.
I see what you're talking
and there's
about,
a sense that actually maybe things are going to be better than they were.
I mean, this says more about us than him, though.
Yeah.
I mean, when he came into power, the West did what it always does, which is think, he lived in London, he's an ophthalmologist, he's got an elegant and British-born wife, right? Obviously, he's going to be a reformer and a moderate and a reformer.
Yeah.
Comes over, Blair gives him a state visit in 2002, thinks about giving him an honorary knighthood, says he's very important in the battle against jihad.
Is that right?
Yes.
Can you imagine if that had happened?
Right.
Jesus Christ.
And I'm not, I understand why Blair did that. Remember, this is not long after 9/11. The war on terror was very, very vivid, very live.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, this guy played the West brilliantly. He'd no intention of reforming or anything. And he knew, like his father, that, the Assad rule over Syria, this incredibly diverse country, depended on tyrannical rule and industrial scale torture.
Yeah.
And he used chemical weapons against his own people in 2013. The civil war, which started after the Arab Spring in 2011 and may be continuing, or may, we hope, stop now, has claimed at least 300,000 Syrian civilians, possibly 600,000, with a further 100,000 missing.
And 90% of them are down to Bashar.
Oh, Assad, brackets, where are their marches? And was an absolutely merciless, brutal tyrant. And any buts after that are completely misplaced.
That's why that John Simpson tweet just seemed so...
It was so strange.
I mean, I can't imagine what he was thinking. I mean, but to say that he's done many evil things, but he's not wicked, he's weak. Well, the whole thing is...
well, it's also... It's a very unsubtle analysis of evil.
Yeah.
I mean, wickedness does not come necessarily looking like Darth Vader. It comes in many forms. And Bashar al-Assad's sort of very poor communication skills and rather weak manner did not mean that he was not a brutally strong autocrat.
Talking of which, so 2011, the Arab Spring kicks off. There's disorder and calls for democracy throughout the Arab world. This is when he really gets going.
He really gets it. I mean, he really dials it up to 11. And there has basically been civil war ever since.
Yeah.
And he has, there have been many massacres. His father was no slouch in that department either.
Yeah.
But the son... famously there was the use of sarin at Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus, in 2013.
And if you've got a strong stomach, the pictures of the children
are unbearable.
It is it's awful.
So that was and we can talk perhaps in part 2 when we talk about geopolitics about that was the moment when a lot of people said enough.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. And the interesting thing is that until quite recently, he looked like he was being sort of ushered back into the family of nations. So he was, last year, 2023, he was welcomed back into the Arab League.
That's right.
And quite a lot of EU nations were saying, well, maybe we should start resuming, diplomatic links with Syria and so on. So the question then is, if he was, beginning to edge back towards, have to be slightly cautious, but edge back towards something like respectability or, what happened.
Yeah.
And I think 3 things happened. The first was that this movement, HTS, developed a really impressive. This is a thing that's happening in the world, which is that quite small movements, happening in Ukraine as well, are developing their own sort of cottage industry arms production systems very quickly. And they, 3D printing is a big deal. So they had drones, mortar shells, guided missiles, and they were the strategy by which Jelani's people got to Damascus was militarily brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, there was obviously a combination of diplomacy and military threat that just did the trick. The second thing is that Russia was distracted by Ukraine, which meant that it wasn't able to look after its client Syria as much as it wanted to.
Yeah.
The third thing was that October the 7th set off as we've said often in the pod, set off a historic chain reaction, which led to the collapse like dominoes of Iran's proxy forces, Hamas, Hezbollah. Now you've got the Iranian Revolutionary Guards fleeing Syria. So those 3 things really made a massive difference to Assad's viability.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the fascinating figure of Jelani, who he really is.
And his backstory is amazing.
Yeah.
He's called Jelani in recognition of his family's expulsion from the Golan Heights.
Yes,
in
that's
the
right.
6-day war.
He was radicalized by the Second Intifada.
Jelani meaning Golan.
That's right.
In Syria,
he grew up. He was born in Riyadh. He's of Syrian origin, but he, as you say, he was.
Well, his dad. So his dad is kicked out of the Golan Heights, ends up in Syria, argues against the Syrian government, is imprisoned in Syria, escapes from prison, flees to Iraq, and goes to university in Iraq from very humble stock.
Yeah.
And becomes an economist, and then ends up working in Saudi Arabia in the oil industry.
Yeah.
Marries a geography teacher and has this kid. So the point is, he is born into this maelstrom of
he's
agony, isn't he?
He has seen everything. Now, obviously, one wants him to be Mandela.
Yeah.
One wants him.
Well, do you know who he's? He's got a degree in media studies. This guy.
Right. He's very, very adept.
So clever. Obviously he's new to most of us, isn't he? But
yes, but the interviews he's done on PBS and CNN is very impressive.
He's definitely going for the Fidel Castro vibe.
Yeah, I mean,
the same fatigue, the beard.
In Arab social media, they're calling him Jelani Zelensky. Right?
Are they really?
Yes.
Yeah,
so that gives you an idea. So, and he's obviously a brilliant man. I mean, his pitch through interviews and statements is obviously directed as much to a Western audience as to the Syrian people, which is, he's got this past, but he wants to cooperate over the remaining chemical weapons in Syria. He wants to get the UN involved. He promises to treat the Kurdish, Christian and Alawite minorities with respect. He wants to dissolve HTS eventually into a modern government. Yeah. He even said, which makes him sound like Justin Trudeau of Canada, diversity is a strength, which I certainly didn't expect. So that's, his sell is very impressive. But you have to bear in mind, this guy is also, as you kind of hinted at, is in origin anyway, a full-bore Islamist. He was Al-Qaeda. He was a former lieutenant of the ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who Trump famously killed. He spent time in Abu Ghraib and Camp Bucas and in prison. He's
cut deals with Zarqawi about
the lot.
He has dealt with the hardest of the hard.
He has come from the hardest aspect. He is personally listed personally listed by the US State Department as a specially designated global terrorist with a 10 million bounty on his head.
Yeah.
The movement HTS is prescribed as a terrorist organization in the UK, as it was in May 2017, on the grounds that it was just an alternative name for Al-Qaeda. So we're at this moment where everyone is hoping that he's as good as he looks, but look, we were burned in Afghanistan in 2021. Do you remember all the briefings about Taliban 2.0?
Yeah.
They'd changed, they'd reformed, Ask Afghan women today how that's going. And, it's not just that. There's a long history of this. I mean, 79 in Iran, the fall of the Shah. It was meant to be a progressive revolution, and it ended up being a theocratic fascist regime.
But the West is caught in this terrible position again of wanting to believe, but being rightly cynical about, okay, well, let's see it happen.
Yeah, I mean,
but the alternative is the alternative fear is a Libya-style absolute breakdown of social order.
The Lamy statement, which I was just listening to before we started to record, he was quite hard on. We're waiting to see before we deprescribe HTS. The proof has to be in the pudding.
But Matt, if they are, so I was thinking that, and I was thinking, well, are there any other national governments that are prescribed? And there aren't. Because there's an element of the Taliban in Afghanistan. There's a part of their organization is prescribed, including the interior minister. But the Taliban aren't prescribed because you can't prescribe a national government.
The question that he has to answer, and he does have to answer it. I mean, everyone's very excited at the moment, and rightly so, right? Yeah. One has to give the Syrians, this is their moment. It's wonderful. But you also have to retain a certain degree of, calm, because we don't know this dude.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
And if we, in a kind of emotional rush, hand him legitimacy immedly rather than after some due diligence. I'm not talking like years. But there's talk already this morning, 24 hours after Assad goes. We've got to take him off the list. He's got to be. Let's see. Let's see how the next few days go.
It's just that it feels it's almost a unique situation where if this guy, obviously they've got this transitional prime minister, and he's clearly, as some others have alluded to, it seems like he's a politician as well as a freedom fighter / terrorist, whatever you want to call him, because he's clearly done a deal with this guy ahead of time. So the minute that they move and take control of the government and they become the government of Syria, then the West has to deal with them in some form.
Well, look, I mean, there are, again, two elements that they'll have been dealing with them underground with CIA people and MI6 people for a long time. Right?
Yeah.
So one needn't worry about comms.
Yeah.
The communications will be there. The question is, separately, how quickly, if at all, do you remove all the
obstacles,
proscriptions upon him, right? Yeah. And I think you have to be kind of a bit cautious. I mean, look, it's only day one. You know, I mean, we don't know. For instance, we don't know to what extent he really commands the whole country.
Right. Because his force is relatively small.
It is relatively small.
It's under 10,000 people.
Now,
isn't it?
I mean, if momentum is the key, and it often is, then he's way ahead of the pack. Mm-hmm. But there are lots of other elements in this. There are the Kurds who are fighting ISIS. There's ISIS itself. Yeah. There are 900 American troops in country. Yeah. There is... there
are Russian bases.
I mean, more of that anon, you know. I think, and you can see that there, as much as the West is welcoming it, they are taking... they're sort of trust but verifies. So there have been US attacks on ISIS sites over the weekend, and Israeli strikes on remaining chemical weapons sites. So what they're trying to do, and I suspect, I'd be very surprised if he doesn't know.
Yeah. Yes.
About all this,
because to prevent or to preempt any kind of violent reaction from him.
That, but also. the worst charge that can be laid at his door is that if we, so to speak, if we say he's our man too quickly, and there's chemical weapons around, what remains of ISIS, which is bigger than people think, will merge with some of his forces who are perhaps not as reformed, not as reconstructed, to essentially create the sum of all fears, which is an Islamist country with weapons of mass destruction. Now, we're not there, but that's why it's important. A lot of confidence building has to happen now.
And you to your earlier point, where how much he's telling a story about himself, literally saying to CNN, don't worry about the things I said when I was in my 20s and 30s. I was on a journey, and now.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, and even if he believes that today, he's going to come under enormous pressure from absolute psychopath lunatics within his own ranks who've got sympathies with people like ISIS.
I mean, he does. He is a masterly user of language, which can be very useful in negotiations, but it can also conceal intent. So he combines this belief in pluralism, he says, whilst also saying he stands by Islamic law. Now, the very definition of Islamic law is you don't tolerate pluralism. So which is it? What there has to be a bit of clarity. Now, to be fair, I think that these are not questions lost on the people that he'll be talking to from the West, either sort of publicly or more probably covertly. I mean, I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine Damascus is fucking swarming with spooks at the moment who are talking to him and his representatives and saying, okay, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen before we can do this, this and this. And that's a good way of doing it. It didn't work in Kabul in 2021, but that was different. And, one always one always hopes for the best.
I think the best summary I've heard of it so far was from a Syrian living in the UK. And she said that today was a day of celebration with fear.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where we're at. Listen, I'll tell you what. Let's
just one more point before we move. Dexter Filkins, who's a brilliant American journalist who wrote The Forever War, said yesterday in an article, I think it was in the Free Press, that the most interesting thing about Jolani was that the Americans hadn't tried to kill him. Which suggests that a level of deep intelligence. Yeah,
someone said
that someone has said
we can deal with this guy.
This guy may well be the real thing.
Yeah.
And remember, a lot of very senior jihadis in Hezbollah and else have been picked out in the last 18 months. So he may be onto something there. Okay,
let's take a very short break because and we're going to come back and talk about some of the consequences that are
the bigger picture
already evolving.
They certainly
some
are.
Extraordinary things happening in Europe already tonight. So join us in a couple of minutes. I was listening I couldn't quite believe my own ears when I heard that Germany, Spain, I think, Italy and the UK are saying they're pausing asylum applications from Syrians. It's very consequential in Germany, where, of course, we all remember there's 1 million Syrians. But the thing that made me think, oh, my God, Europe is one fucked up continent. Austria, right? This is 12 hours after the liberation. Austria has announced, the Home Minister has said, we are now going to embark on an orderly deportation of all Syrians in the country. I mean, 12 hours later.
Calm down, guys. I mean, again,
it's incredible.
Let's not rush, right? So how we got here on the geopolitical side is, I think, a huge story. So you can trace the modern geopolitics through the lens of Syrian conflict. So let's go back to 2013, okay? We mentioned earlier the chemical attack on Ghouta, right, in suburb of Damascus, sarin appalling. Obama and David Cameron talk and agree enough is enough. This is a red line, and they plan a strike, or an airstrike on Assad's regime on or before the 2nd of September to shock him to the negotiating table. Ed Miliband loses his nerve. He's then leader of the Labour Party. And MPs vote against the motion on 29th of August. Cameron pulls the plug.
Yeah.
This then, obviously, Iraq playing a big role. We don't want to go there.
Exactly.
Obama then loses his nerve on the 31st of August. The momentum disappears.
Yeah.
And Putin looks at what just happened and thinks they're weak.
Yeah.
So
And he was right.
The next year, 2014, he annexes Crimea. And the funny thing about that...
So are you laying the entire catastrophe of the 21st century at Ed Miliband's
No,
door?
I will never forgive Ed Miliband for what he did on that.
Yeah.
And nor will a lot of people, not just on the Tory side. That was the moment, oddly enough, which is a bizarre thing to say, when the modern America First doctrine began. It had a very attractive mien because Obama is great and Trump is evil.
Yeah.
But that's when it started. And ever since then, Putin has been ratcheting it up.
Yeah.
Now, what's great is that this is a massive, massive humiliation for Putin, who hates to lose.
Mm-hmm.
He may well, there may be very practical problems. He's got a naval facility in Tartus in Syria, which the Russians leased for 49 years in 2017, and there's an airfield in Latakia, which he'll probably lose. And they've already evacuated most of the Russians. He's still trying to, there are Russian personnel trying to negotiate with this sort of fledgling regime, saying, could we keep bits of it? But I think, the keeping Russians around is not something the liberated Syrians are going to want much of.
Right. That's right.
And so that's a big deal. And the other thing that's hugely important is that Iran has been totally defeated in this regional war. Mm-hmm. It has lost on every. Syria was its biggest local ally. Yeah. It's lost Hamas. It's lost Hezbollah. It's sending its Revolutionary Guards home from Syria. This is a disaster for Iran. So,
because just to explain the geography as well, Syria was the through route, wasn't it?
Exactly. Again, we're back to Clapham Junction. So without Syria, Russia loses its gateway to Africa and its base in the Middle East, and Iran loses its major ally. And it's a very big moment regionally.
Yeah.
But then you start to move to the even bigger picture, which is, okay, great, but what now? We're recording this on Monday afternoon. The UN Security Council is supposed to be meeting, a meeting called by Russia. We await to hear what they have to say.
Really? I didn't realise the Russians had called the meeting.
Well, I think they are nervous about things overtaking. They'll want to veto things, right? They'll want to be there to veto.
So is it in the Russians' interest for the UN to be playing a prominent?
Well, what the Russians will be wanting to do, and trying desperately to get the Chinese to do too, is to veto anything of any consequence. Yeah. Because what they won't want is the Security Council to say anything approaching this looks good. We're sending the following things to Syria. Proper help. Yeah. They'll want to put a brake on it
because there is potentially a really important role for the United Nations, isn't it? Which is bloody useless.
Otherwise. This is another huge test for the UN after a long series of failures. On the shoulders of a Norwegian called Geir Pedersen, who's the UN Special Envoy for Syria, has suddenly landed, the weight of history. It's a major test of the UN's capacity to marshal humanitarian aid. The International Criminal Court has been totally bloody useless on Syria. So that needs to go up a gear. I'm not optimistic about that because they've never shown any real interest. The French have tried very hard to get them to do something about Syria, but the ICC is a very strange outfit. Yeah. But the key is nation building, because at this point in the argument, the West tends to say, great, democracy, pluralism, voting, citizens' assemblies, fact-checking. Yeah. But actually what really matters to Syrians, what sort of in the medium term, now that they've got rid of Assad, and they're still, I mean, let's not, again, they're literally, white helmets are literally still trying to break into the cells.
It's the most remarkable thing, isn't it? They can see the cells on CCTV, but they don't know how to get to them.
How do they get through to these? I mean, it is a dungeon, literally a dungeon from hell.
And you've also got hundreds of thousands of people living in tents on the borders in Turkey. You've got millions of people displaced in the EU and the UK, and those people, that's the scale of the prize, isn't it?
It is.
If you can stabilize Syria, a lot of those people will want to go home.
So, but that doesn't work, as we know from Iraq and elsewhere. That doesn't work unless you do proper nation building. Now, I'm not suggesting that this should involve Western troops at all, just to be clear, but I am suggesting that money and business and we're in a really difficult moment in history here, because in the next few years, basically the world is going to have to rebuild Gaza, Ukraine and Syria at least, and I'm sure other places, which basically amounts to 100 Marshall Plans at a time when, we don't even spend enough on defense. And of course, that brings us inevitably to America.
Who are about to disengage on the most biggest scale imaginable.
Biden is trying, his usual slightly ineffectual best to get a bit of money in, and they want to get out this journalist Austin Tice, who disappeared there in 2012, and there, as I say, there are 900 US troops and quite a few more under the radar American military contractors in country, and he wants to keep them there as a sort of firewall against ISIS. But the truth is that he's running out the clock, and on January the 20th. Trump arrives, and the truth is that if you watch the sort of traffic yesterday, most governments were listening to what Trump was saying.
And what was Trump saying?
And Trump was saying
extraordinary tweet.
And the tweets the posts which we were sharing is basically, I don't want anything to do with it. I mean, literally, he said on X, he blamed Obama, naturally, because it's always Obama's fault. Actually, it might be Obama's fault a bit in this case. He said the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is block caps, by the way. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. And then on Sunday, he warmed to his theme and basically threw it back to Putin and said on Truth Social, I know, this is wonderful, mad Trump. I know Vladimir well. This is his time to act. China can help. The world is waiting. Now, what that really means is you can all fuck off. The difficulty is that, for the reasons we discussed in part one, Syria, whether he likes it or not, is an incredibly important strategic site. And in fact, he did bomb it a bit in term one. I mean, you're not supposed to mention that. But he did, for all his America First credentials. So I think he'll find it very hard not to get drawn in. But on what basis, I don't know. And I dread to think, what he might do, because he is so... he uses a kind of battle axe where a scalpel is required.
Exactly.
But you made the best point of all, which is the migration issue, because week after week we've discussed and will continue to discuss the role of immigration in the sort of poisoning of the far right's, or the way they've used immigration to poison politics around the world, and The influx of Syrian refugees in 2015 was a big part of that. I've just been reading Angela Merkel's memoirs, and they're very moving, actually, because I still think she was right. But, she let in 1 million Syrians. That's a lot.
That's right.
I mean, we only let in about 20,000, right? So that had a transformative effect on the continent. Now, the question, to your point about everyone pausing, is... nobody knows which direction the traffic's going to go in. I mean, I'm sure some people will go back, but it may be, if this very sort of unstable cocktail of factors doesn't look good, we have more people leaving.
Getting out. But this brings me back to my ultimate feeling, which is that we've got to somehow take this. if you're a golfer playing the percentage shot, the
Yes.
percentage shot is to do everything you can to make this work for this guy.
Yes.
And so I hear completely about we've got to go with caution, and of course we have. We've got to see what he does, and of course we do. But if part of that conversation, and you said the thing which is obviously true, which is that this is ground that's been laid for some time now with this guy. He has to be given the assurance and the hand-holding that we'll do what, not in a paternalistic, colonizing kind of way, but whatever he wants from the West, providing he meets the standards we can go along with, we will help him.
Well,
we will rebuild.
I think that is exactly what Biden at the top and in fact most world leaders are saying, which is, all right, it's 24 hours in. Don't expect us to give you the Scouts badge, immediately. But peacemaking and negotiation, particularly in a situation as complicated as this, is all about confidence building.
Yeah,
and it has to be on both sides. And it seems to me from his sort of public performances, he's very well aware of this.
Yeah,
None of this, he knows all this. The question is, now he's in Damascus, what does he do practically?
Yeah.
Because the rhetoric is great. He hasn't gone through Aleppo and Homs and elsewhere, with scorched earth, killing people. So there are reasons to be cautiously optimistic, but we cannot ignore the fact that, his ranks are teeming with jihadis, and this is where ISIS was born.
Yeah.
So it's just the real world.
Yeah.
It's where enlightenment, the rubber of enlightenment hits the road, if you like.
That's right.
Which is absolutely not to say, by the way, I'm not saying this guy is obviously a wrong un at all, right? But I do think to sort of frame it in an optimistic way, I think so far so good. I think people are making the right noises. They are saying to him, we're watching you. You look good so far. Keep it up.
Yeah.
A week. There's no reason to think that a week from now we couldn't be in an even better place.
Yeah. Let's hope so.
And I think that. It is such an opportunity. Let's put it this way: it is such an opportunity to get the UN back on a good footing.
Yeah.
To get the idea of our responsibility to failed states back on a good footing. To get migration back on the footing we've been talking about till we're banging our heads against the wall.
Well, imagine how. If you think about the human benefits of having people wanting to go back home, but having experienced Europe in a positive way.
Yes.
Like those million Germans, by and large, the majority of them, the million Syrians in Germany, by and large, they've had a very positive experience.
Extremely.
Of Germany.
Working.
And some of them will want to stay because they've built lives.
A lot,
and
I would
businesses.
imagine, actually.
But some of them will want to go back home. And then just imagine how that osmotic kind of reintegration of people who want to see places get better, the benefits.
But Matt, you made the most important point in the whole podcast, which is deportation is the worst option.
Fucking Austria, honestly.
We're at this point where a lot of Syrians in Germany, but also in Turkey and elsewhere, will be thinking, I'd quite like to go back and see Granny, right?
Yeah.
But they'll also be thinking, but I don't want to get shot.
That's right.
And I don't think that's an unreasonable kind of concern to have. And they'll also be watching on all the borders of Syria people swarming out, because they will be.
Yeah.
So again, deportation, it's so crude and Trumpian, right?
Yeah.
There may be the basis of a terrific news story on immigration, which is, look, refugees come, some of them stay, some of them go back when it's safe. That's what the refugee system is for.
And I think it's perfectly reasonable to say we're going to pause the decision-making process until we work out what the hell's going on.
100%.
Just fucking Austria. What is wrong with the place?
I think that again, you see the populist problem, don't you?
Yeah.
Which is populist politics cannot deal with a problem of this. I mean, God, talk about four-dimensional chess. You know, there are so many elements to this. There are so many things that could go wrong, but there are so many things that could go right.
Yeah.
You know,
I wonder what Farage is thinking right now about how to play it.
I'd love to. He will say,
The man with the poster.
all right, well, since we're recording this before his show, right? Let's have a little bit of a bet, right?
Yeah.
I bet he says that Jelani's an absolute, you know, basically Bin Laden times 12.
Yeah.
He's hoodwinking the West. We're all woke liberals, and that this is just further proof that what a bad idea it was to let the Syrians in.
Yeah.
The Breaking Point poster was absolutely justified in 2016, and we shouldn't be fooled because they're all coming to get us again.
Because
something like that.
Because what Farage does is what Campbell nailed him on that Question Time
last week.
Is using any inconvenience to his own political advantage.
You know, he will reframe what is a... Look, whatever else is true, whatever else happens now, this is a good moment. This is a moment for celebration. Okay,
Yeah.
the end of the Assad dynasty, the fact that he has crawled off to Moscow to live, I suspect, in rather less plush circumstances.
Although I read he's bought 30 apartment blocks in Moscow over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the problem. This is the problem.
This is Assad, not Farage.
No. Well, as far as we know, I mean, wouldn't it actually Tucker Carlson and Nigel Farage?
Yeah.
Come the revolution, may end up living in Moscow, sharing a duplex in Moscow. But you know, it's annoying that he's very unlikely ever to face justice. But sod him, and you know, one hopes now that what we call the international rules-based order, with a sort of faint smile, really kicks into gear here, because the opportunities are huge. Now, on that note, and it never gets better than this, Keir Starmer's in the region at the moment.
Great.
UAE and Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, what are you worried about?
Couldn't be better timing. For once.
What are you worried about?
I'll end this on the most ridiculously romantic, stupid, optimistic observation. Right, this guy Jelani, when he was a teenager, fell in love with an Alawite girl. The Alawites are the
Assad gang.
Assad gang. And the families wouldn't have it. And
yes.
There's a kind of Romeo and Juliet story in his deep backstory.
Only with suicide vests.
And it did suggest that possibly there's a human heart.
That's a wonderful, and you know, it is important. We're so battered by bad news. I want to be hopeful but not credulous. That's as far as I can get today.
I think that's fair.
I hope by the end of the week, and perhaps next week, and by Christmas, I'll be thinking, this is looking good.
Great.
You know?
Yeah. Let's hope so.
Fingers
dear
crossed.
Listeners. We could all do with a bit of good news.
We really could, you know. I want for Christmas.
All we want for Christmas. By the way, talking about what you want for Christmas, Matt, is what would you give somebody for Christmas?
Well, I know what the best gift in the world is.
What is that, Matt?
It's a New European subscription.
And if you're a subscriber already, then you can gift a subscription to some lucky recipient, some lucky loved one who'll love you even more. And if you're not a New European subscriber, you really should be. And you can sign up from as little as £1 a week, and you will get a free copy of Alistair Campbell's 2024 diaries when you do, and they're exclusive to us. So that's the only place you can get that fantastic read. So go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts. That's the number 2, MATTS. Send in any questions, any feedback to 2Matts@tnepublishing.com. Number 2, MATTS@tnepublishing.com. Thanks as ever to our production team led by Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. And until
we'll see you on Thursday.
We are going. Big news. Some news, folks. We are switching.
Breaking news.
to, because we record our Friday morning podcast on Thursday evening.
Yes,
but we're
and
gonna,
we thought
we're just going to do it on Thursday night from now on, so you'll get it sooner.
It's
because we were fed up a bit hearing the news agents talk about what we were talking about before us.
Yeah, so sod that. We're gonna go live on Thursday.
Live,
going live,
device near you,
live and unplugged.
Have a great week in the meantime.
Have a good week.